What is justice? Is it an eye for an eye? Is it a limb for a limb? Or is it something much deeper than that? The Republic by Plato seeks to answer these questions by dismantling generic beliefs about things such as justice and maturing them to paint a more accurate picture. In the Republic, chapters are referred to as books, and in Book 1 there are four main characters. There is Cephalus, his son Polemarchus, an angry young man named Thrasymachus, and Socrates. The majority of the chapter takes place in Cephalus's house, which sits in a very important district port of Athens called Piraeus. Piraeus is booming with economic, political, and social progress as young men go there to make a name for themselves. So Cephalus having a house here is a deep symbol of wealth, and the conversation between him and Socrates will revolve mostly around his riches and old age. Plato, throughout this book, does a wonderful play on words. Socrates, at the beginning of the chapter, states, "I went down to Piraeus." Going down to Piraeus could symbolize how Socrates views Piraeus to be a lesser place compared to his standards. Going down to Piraeus could also symbolize a move away from the intellectual and moral heights from central Athens, where philosophy and democracy are king. Although it's subtle, the reason I point this out is because this foreshadows much about the content of conversation that Socrates has with the other characters. So now that we've stepped down to Piraeus, we see Socrates heading back up to central Athens after finishing his visit for a religious festival, when Polemarchus suddenly grabs a hold of him and tells him he can't leave without visiting his house, and says he will not listen to anything Socrates says to convince him otherwise. This encounter in itself shows the ignorance of the people of Piraeus, as Socrates is forced to go to a home he had no intention of visiting, nor any desire. The man just wanted to leave the place as soon as he could. He basically got kidnapped, but not as serious. Now at his home, Polemarchus' father Cephalus welcomes Socrates, and so begins the conversation. The first topic is old age, and this is covered very quickly. Cephalus has 2 points for old age. Number 1. Those who blame their old age for their unhappiness were probably unhappy when they were young as well, and blamed something else for their unhappiness, be it their looks, or their parents, or their peers. Number 2, the greatest gift of having wealth is that it stops you from being unjust, meaning that you're less likely to fall for temptations to make a quick buck. So, when Socrates asks what justice is to Cephalus, he gives a very generic response saying that justice is speaking the truth and repaying one's debts. Socrates, not satisfied with the answer, paints a scenario for Cephalus. Imagine a man who gives his friends some weapons to hold on to. That same man comes back but is now insane or not himself. This man asks his friend to return him his weapons. The friend refuses. Is that just or unjust? At this point, Cephalus passes the conversation on to Polemarchus, who eagerly states that it's just because justice means to do good to friends and harm to enemies. To which Socrates responds, "How can we know for a fact that the person we believe to be good is good, and the person we believe to be bad is bad?" Socrates says that humans can have poor judgment, which could mean that one could do good to an enemy and harm to a friend. Socrates also says that if a just person were to harm someone, they would make the victim unjust. He explains that musicians make people musical, not unmusical. Teachers make people educated and not uneducated. So a just man must make others just as well. He's basically saying that it's not the role of a just person to harm others, but actually the opposite. It's the role of the unjust person to do harm. Thrasymachus at this point has had enough of sitting on the sidelines. He screams at Socrates and Polemarchus, asking why they're being so idiotic by talking about such nonsense. He calls out Socrates, saying that he has nothing original to add to the conversation, so he goes and finds negativity in people's beliefs. To this, Socrates says, "How can I tell you what justice is when I don't know?" He convinces Thrasymachus to help him understand justice, since he claims to know what it is. Thrasymachus explains that justice is nothing other than the advantage of the stronger. He says that various forms of governments make laws that are advantageous to their institution and declare anyone under the rule of the government that refuse to follow their laws to be unjust. Socrates refutes this argument by saying that rulers are prone to making errors when creating laws. Therefore, the population is forced to follow laws that could be advantageous to the ruler or disadvantageous. One such modern-day example of this is the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich tax strategy. This strategy involved funneling profits through an Irish company, then a Dutch company, and finally another Irish company headquartered in a tax haven like Bermuda, effectively minimizing the company's tax obligations. Tech giants like Google and Apple used this structure to save billions in taxes. Ireland closed this loophole back in 2015. This loophole was highly disadvantageous for multiple governments, depriving them of substantial tax revenue. Socrates explains in his way that no craft is created for its own advantage. He gives examples of how medicine is created for the advantage of the body. Horse breeding is created for the advantage of the horse. He explains further and then says, "No kind of knowledge seeks or orders what is advantageous to itself, then but what is advantageous to the weaker, which is subject to it." Socrates' statement implies that a just ruler does not make laws that are to his advantage, but the advantage of the population, the people he rules, i.e. the weak subjects the craft exists for. Thrasymachus, not having a better argument, just starts to outright insult Socrates, showing his own insecurities and ignorance. He goes on a long rant about how those who are just live a painful life, where even their family members are repelled by their honesty. He gives examples of how when a just politician refuses to do unjust favors, he is signing his early retirement. Such politicians and other just people are not loved by their community or their family. After dropping these bombs, Thrasymachus intends to leave when everyone begs him to stay and gives Socrates a chance to respond. Socrates has a long back and forth with Thrasymachus, and they come to the conclusion that a just person tries to outdo those that are unjust or ignorant, whereas an unjust person tries to outdo everyone, whether they're just or unjust. He says that just people rule out of necessity, not out of desire for money. He says that when given a choice to be ruled by someone unjust or someone worse than him, the just man will choose to pick up the mantle himself rather than being ruled by a lesser man. This is merely out of necessity. He then goes to explain that for a ruler to expand his country, everyone must work together rather than trying to outdo each other. Because when everyone is trying to outdo each other, the country doesn't expand. The opposite happens. So to be a successful ruler, you must be just. To live a rich life, you must collaborate with others instead of trying to outdo everyone you meet, thus being just. The chapter closes with Socrates saying that we have discussed many things about justice, but I still know nothing.